into the background, of course, on the Phoenicians, let me first talk about exactly, who were the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were like Canaanite peoples. They theorize from historians that they're kind of very similar to what would be like the Israelites or Jews later. They kind of live in the same area, although if you know about it, they live right above that, mostly in what was now the country of Lebanon. Of course, circa 1200 BC is when they take off as a culture. But they do think that these Canaanites, went back thousands of years. Like I think 2,000-3,000 BC or longer that they go back. And we'll get to it later, but one thing they're very famous for, their maritime trade. They're great sailors, the Phoenicians, sailing throughout the Mediterranean Sea. They think they sailed into the Atlantic, also I'll talk about later. And so they're a civilization that influenced a lot of other peoples throughout that region. They influenced the Egyptians, they influenced the Greeks, probably Mesopotamia as well. Kind of here's kind of an image, of course, of modern Lebanon today. Lebanon, you see there, sort of see the Lebanese flag on the top left. They say most Lebanese people are still descended, from going back to Canaanite peoples from a long time ago. I think I read it's about 90% still today are descendants of people that lived throughout that region a long time ago. But you can see those are some of their famous cities: Tripoli, Beirut, Sidon, Tyre. Those were once famous, city-states that went back to like Phoenician times. And kind of get into a little background about their culture, about the name itself. The term Phoenicia supposedly translates from Greek. It means usually the purple land. I'll get to it in a little bit later. It's like I talked about in the video because of that famous dye they had. They were known as also the purple people. So that's what supposedly Phoenicians meant, the purple people. Phoenix, you see that word up there, Phoenix, which means purple or deep red, is usually would be like a Phoenician person, would be what that would be. And predominantly lived in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they took basically what were these what they think are murex snails. They think that they're kind of like mollusks, basically. They would take the actual mucus of the actual snails, and they would make the dye out of it. And I guess they got it on their hands or on their body, and so they were known as the purple people, but they're mostly known for exporting it, of course, to people, things like that. So and they call it different names. I'll kind of put on the screen here, but Tyrian purple, I think, or royal purple was quite a common nickname that they would call the dye that they sold, I guess, in dye cloth, et cetera, that went with that. And Phoenicians were, like I said, primarily known for maritime trade, like basically a type of civilization that traded with different civilizations throughout the region. And so that enabled them to create a huge network of trade, which lasted, they think, close to 1,000 years at one point. And like in later, like with the Israelite kings and all that, they would actually kind of borrow that, like the purple dye. They would have those bluish robes that they would have, which was like the mark of like royalty, the mark of kings. And so that's sometimes why they called it royal purple, the nickname for that. But like I said, they had different cities. They're really city-states that were independent of each other. They weren't really, like all like one kingdom or empire. Each like city-state was ruled by a separate like monarch at first. Over time, they go to like an oligarchy, which the Carthaginians were more known for. They had kind of like an oligarchic republic, I think is what it will be, of course, later. Here's some other images I'll kind of show you. That, of course, is kind of ruins of what is Tyre right there. that you're looking at. Of course, a major city in modern Lebanon. I think Tyre today has a population of about 200,000 people that live there. You're looking at the ruins of it, that's left of it. And they do think that it was a city that was probably settled as far back as about 2800 BC. This is according to some historians today, and they do think that Herodotus was one of the first to really mention the city of Tyre, like its existence and all that. So it's a very ancient city. It's considered one of the oldest cities in the world, too. Most people don't know that. But yeah, you're looking at some of the ruins of it right there with those three images. Of course, one thing that they're very famous for is their alphabet. You see, which now the alphabet is something that they think they help to kind of influence like other alphabets throughout the world. Phoenician is considered to be one of the first major phonetic alphabets, a simplified alphabet, which, if you know about it, it's very simplified. It only has 22 letters, like 22 consonants that's in it. Written right to left, so it's like a Semitic type language, which they think descended from maybe Proto-Canaanite languages from a long time ago. It has no vowels in it, and like they don't really add vowels to alphabets later. So a lot of early alphabets like Hebrew, etc., Aramaic don't have vowels, but they do think it's an important alphabet because of the fact that it influenced the rise of many other alphabets. Like it basically led to a lot of your Semitic alphabets. Like it led to Aramaic, led to Hebrew, then of course also Arabic, and then on the other side, like Greek, Latin, and other similar alphabets were also influenced by it as well. It's very similar to Hebrew, of course. Later, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, you see there. And they have different names for it. Like the Carthaginians used it up to like the 2nd century BC as an actual language. And sometimes they do call it the Punic alphabet. That's what sometimes the Romans would call it, which is really Phoenician in the Latin. So here's kind of like a map showing you here, like how the alphabet is related, like the family tree going back to the Phoenician. So you can see how kind of like the Phoenician kind of led to the branches of different type of languages throughout the world. So you can see Phoenician led to a lot of Aramaic, Assyrian type languages, etc. Hebrew, Arabic, Persian too. I think Persian was also influenced by Phoenician as well. Etruscan Latin, of course, led to a lot of your Western languages being developed. Of course, Greek, Cyrillic, even Russian. The Russian language, of course, is somehow descended from Phoenician. Old Hebrew, Samaritan. You even got some of these Proto-Arabic, Southern Arabic, and Ethiopian languages are actually descended from the Phoenicians as well. So that's pretty amazing, about how the Phoenicians influenced all these different languages, throughout the world. That's like their legacy, by the way, because if you know about the Phoenicians, most of their culture was wiped out. Here's, by the way, a map showing you the Phoenician trade network. So you can see Phoenicians traded throughout like the Aegean Basin, like Crete, Greece, Western Turkey. They traded a lot with Egypt, which was nearby, Cyprus as well. And then you can see they pushed into like parts of North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Spanish islands, and then Spain. They do think they may have traded throughout the Atlantic. There's been theories that the Phoenicians sailed up to where Britain is, the so-called 10 islands, they sometimes called it, so they got 10 from them. And then some people think they sailed throughout the Atlantic. There's even a crazy theory, if you know about this, that they found America, like they sailed to America or something like that, but they're not sure if that's true or not. They do think they may have explored parts of Africa also. Here's a better map showing you like the different areas. They would, trade with these different parts of the Mediterranean. So you can see Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, of course, where Phoenicia was originally, but they sailed westward. Part of what happened, you have to understand, is that the Phoenicians later get overwhelmed by other civilizations. You get like the Assyrian culture, and the Babylonians come in and eventually absorb, conquer that area and rule over it. The Greeks, the Persians, all those at one point kind of occupy that area. So Phoenicians pushed more westward into the Mediterranean Sea, eventually ending up mostly in the western part of North Africa, between Libya and Morocco now, which I'll get to later. Carthage, you see there, one of their major cities they found, will later be one of the main capital of the Carthaginian Empire, which is the capital was based, I'll get to it later, now in Tunisia. Of course, they were known for a lot of ships, like the Phoenician bireme is something that they were very famous for. Biremes were these ancient type galley ship warships that had these two superimposed rows of oars on them, where they rowed simultaneously both sides at the same time with sails. They were used in naval warfare, but also a lot of their merchant ships had similar types of mechanism for rowing and sailing. And the average bireme was about 80 feet in length, or if you want it in meters, about maybe 24 meters may have been the average length of a bireme. And I think there's different estimates how many rowers they had, maybe 120, like 60 on each side, I guess is what it was they had to have for rowing these vessels. It did give birth to other types of ships later, like the Greeks developed the trireme type warship that was big, especially by the 5th century BC in the golden age of Athens and Greece. And then, of course, the quadrireme was another similar type vessel by the time of like the Romans. You got these kind of vessels. And then you got the quinquereme you may have heard of, which was, I guess, the most advanced type galley ship they have. But galley ships were actually used up to early modern times, believe it or not. Battle of Lepanto, I think, was the last battle where they actually used galley ships. Seriously, which was like in the 16th century. So they were used up to a long time, for thousands of years. They were known as great explorers. I don't know if you know much about this man named Hanno, the navigator. They think he was some type of 5th century BC Phoenician king of some type who went on some kind of expedition to explore parts of the world. And they think he explored parts of North Africa, and then he went into the Atlantic Ocean and explored it. And mostly from, I guess, information that we know about Hanno the navigator is that he explored the west coast of Africa from like around where Morocco is down to the Gulf of Guinea. And they think Hanno was trying to explore that area, I guess, set up more trade routes. I know Africa's got a lot of things like ivory, et cetera. And so they were trying to maybe colonize it as well. And the main source on it is a source that's called the Periplus of Hanno, which they think is some type of Greek source that goes back to about 500 BC. And it's like a Periplus is like a log book, discussing the voyages of a ship or the itineraries of a ship. And Periplus means, I think in Greek, to sail around, like the vessel sailing around. But it's the only source that talks about it. And so they do think that the Phoenicians were famous for exploring parts of the Atlantic Ocean, like parts of Africa. And like I said, maybe they may have explored deeper into the Atlantic, up into like Britain. Some even think they even may have explored west, close to America, but they're not sure about that or not. So that's an interesting topic, about the Phoenicians being great explorers. Like this is all the period before, the time of Columbus, when Columbus comes in 15th century. There's kind of like showing another, map of their travels. Now, some people speculate they may have gone up to Iceland. That's the interesting thing about that, which they're not really sure about for sure. But you can see all the different areas that they may have traded at one point and explored. Now, one thing I'm going to talk about, of course, today, which is big, is the rise of Carthage. That's one of their major cities that the Phoenicians will develop in like around the 9th century BC. And Carthage, if you know about it, was founded in where Tunisia is, like the actual country of Tunisia, which is kind of situated between Libya and Algeria, where it would be today, of course, in North Africa. They theorized that it was at the end of the 9th century. I think the Romans thought that Carthage was founded close to about 814 BC. At least that's their date of when it was founded. Some people think it may have been earlier than that when it was founded. And it grew to be a huge city. If you know about the city of Carthage, it was at one point bigger than Rome, like in Italy, where the Romans were. I think Carthage may have been like 500,000 people by around the 3rd century. And if you know about Carthage, one thing it's very famous for, it was supposedly founded by this woman here named Queen Dido. You see there, Queen Dido. And who was Queen Dido? Queen Dido was believed to be some type of princess who came from, they think, originally from Phoenicia. She was actually the daughter of a king of Tyre, and she fled. She fled Phoenicia and went to North Africa. And she's called Queen Dido. Also, the Greeks later call her Alyssa, as well as her other name that she's dubbed. And she appears in a lot of stories, Queen Dido. If you know about her, one of her main stories that she, of course, is involved in is the story of the Aeneid, which I'll get to. There's been a lot of paintings, too, depicting her. That's a very famous painting Joseph Mallard, William Turner did years ago called Dido Building Carthage. And so she actually bought some land there where Tunisia is, basically where Tunis is, the capital, of Tunisia. And she began constructing this city in the Gulf of Tunis. So I think it's where it is now. The ruins are. Yeah, the story of the Aeneid, if you know much about it, I don't know if you heard about Virgil's famous epic. She appears in it, which Virgil wrote that about 2,000 years ago, the famous epic. And I don't know if you know much about the Romans. The Romans thought they were descendants from the Trojans, who had, been sacked by the Greeks. Anyway, if you know much about Aeneas was this Trojan hero that had survived the Trojan War, like the sack of Troy, and he fled Troy, and he traveled throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Like he went to supposedly North Africa where Carthage is. He went to Greece, Sicily, and eventually ended up in Italy, where he would later found future cities that would be supposedly later Roman cities. But on his travels, he would meet Queen Dido. About this, Queen Dido fell in love with Aeneas. It's sort of a great love story. But if you know what happened, basically, he jilted her. He later rejects her. She wanted to marry him, and so if you know what happened, Queen Dido later killed herself. She threw herself on a funeral pyre, burned herself to death. But they think that story might be made up. I think the Romans may have made up the story about Aeneas and Queen Dido to explain why the Romans and the Carthaginians hate each other and why they fought a bunch of wars against each other. So they're not really sure if that story is really true or not about Queen Dido. But it's a great kind of love story that's maybe rivaled in ancient times with Mark Antony and Cleopatra. If you think about that other version, like in Roman times. So what exactly was the Phoenician Empire that, of course, eventually develops? Well, it was actually a trading empire. It was mostly led by the Phoenicians, of course. It was kind of a multi-ethnic empire. There's different peoples that are actually in the empire, but it peaked between the 6th centuries to the 1st centuries BC. Mostly it was a trading empire, which traded throughout vast amounts of region, of course, of the Mediterranean Sea. especially like around Italy, Spain, and North Africa were the main areas that they traded the most. And I think I've got a map showing you basically the areas of where the Carthaginian Empire was. But you can see it was based mostly in North Africa, like where Carthage is, the ruins are, where Tunisia is now. But part of Sicily, they occupied at one point, Sardinia, Corsica, the islands of Spain right there, and also parts of Spain itself. So those were the main areas, mostly in the Western Mediterranean Sea, was about where they were. And they had a military, which is, true about, the Carthaginian military, but it was composed of a lot of mercenaries, which were from different parts of the Mediterranean Sea. Lots of North Africans, like Libyans, Numidians were in it. Iberians, Gallic type tribes, I think, were in it, as Sicilians also in it. I think even Britons, they kind of like, if you know about that, they even went up to Britain and kind of absorbed some Britons maybe into their empire, maybe as sailors or whatever. But that's something that's true also as well. So it was kind of a multi-ethnic empire. And over time, if you know about it, it became such a dominant power that it ended up in this rivalry with the Romans. Like the Roman Republic would fight them for control of the Mediterranean Sea, especially from the 3rd into the 2nd centuries BC. And really, Carthage was like one of the last main obstacles, really, for the Romans to form their empire, which will eventually take over, the whole Mediterranean Sea, especially by the time of the 1st century BC. So yeah, that's the Carthaginians in their vast empire that they have. They do have this famous event. Of course, I'll get more into later when we talk about the Roman period, because I'll have other future lectures on, of course, on the Roman history coming up later in the semester. But yeah, they do get involved in a series of wars that were called the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars were actually 3 wars which took place between the 3rd century and the 1st centuries BC. 264 to about 146 was the period of the Punic Wars, but they didn't happen at the same time. They basically, if you know much about the Punic Wars, they happened off and on over a long period of time. They were very bloody also as well. Punic Wars may have resulted in up to something like 2 million deaths in the war, mostly fighting North Africa at sea and in parts of also Italy as well. So it was very, very bloody. In fact, one of the bloodiest conflicts really that was probably ever fought in ancient times itself. These are I won't talk about all the wars like they fought in, but those are the 3 actual Punic Wars that they fought in. First Punic War, which was kind of a naval war somewhat between Rome and Carthage. Also, the Second Punic War, which that one was the most famous one. 218 to about 202 BC was when that war was fought. That one is sometimes called the Hannibal War because of the fact that the Carthaginian general Hannibal was involved in it. And it was the bloodiest of the 3 wars. And then you have the Third Punic War, of course, which was the last one of the 3. That's the one which resulted in, of course, the Romans destroying Carthage. Oh, why do they call it Punic Wars? What's the deal? Well, the term Punic is just a Latin or Greek term for Phoenician. So Punic means the Phoenician Wars. In fact, I've got the actual Greek and Latin if you want. Punicus is the Latin term. Where they get that's what the Romans call Phoenician in Latin. And then they do have a kind of a Greek version of it, Phoenici or something like that. It's usually the Greek variation of it. And so that's kind of the origin of where the term Punic originates from over time. But some people do call it the Phoenician Wars also as well, because they knew they were fighting. Yeah, so the Roman Republic, at the time mostly controlled parts of Italy. That's about it. That's all it was. If you study about going back to the 3rd century, that's about all Rome controlled. And then over time, because of this war with Carthage, they end up absorbing all their territories because the Carthaginians end up losing all three wars. They get defeated in all three. And so Rome takes over Spain. They take over all the islands in the Western Atlantic that the Carthaginians have. And then eventually they take over also North Africa, the provinces of those areas that Carthage controls. And so these were like a series of bloody wars that really, were devastating for Carthage. Here's kind of a better look, by the way, at the maps. Of course, if you know about Hannibal Barca, which I'll get to in a second, he was based in Spain. He would launch an attack into Italy in the Second Punic War, which was really the bloodiest one of the bunch. The war is very famous. It's written by different authors, like Polybius. He's a Greek writer writing around the same time as the 2nd century. I think he was around when they have the actual Third Punic War that was going on in mostly North Africa. And so he's considered one of the main sources that really where they get most of the information on the actual wars. Now they have another writer named Livy, who was writing about maybe at the end of the 1st century BC. He has a series of books that are called The History of Rome. I'll talk more about when I get to Roman history. He's got 5 books, I think book 21 through 25, which kind of go into the Second Punic War, more or less, the Hannibal War. But Polybius, I think, has all the main sources about all the three wars that they fight. But it's all written from like a Roman perspective because of the fact that the Romans would eventually destroy the Carthaginians in the war. Yeah, those are some famous, of course, generals that would fight in the Punic Wars. Both those generals, Hannibal Barca on the left and Scipio Africanus, those are the two main generals that fought it out in the Second Punic War. Hannibal was, of course, a very famous Carthaginian general. He was considered the so-called father of military strategy. And if you know about Hannibal, he was famous for invading Italy in the Second Punic War. And Scipio Africanus, sometimes pronounced Scipio, was really the main Roman general that fought Hannibal and defeated him later by the end of the Second Punic War, which was kind of like their downfall afterwards. And I think Scipio was sometimes called the Roman Hannibal. They dubbed him because he was kind of comparable to Hannibal, but both were considered military geniuses in ancient times. They have later the Siege of Carthage, which the Siege of Carthage was involved in the Third Punic War, which that particular war, what happened was the Romans eventually laid siege to the city of Carthage. I think most of Carthage fell, like the territories of it around it that are in North Africa, like Morocco, part of Algeria, and Tunisia. But if you know about that particular siege, the Battle of Carthage also, the Carthaginians barricaded themselves inside the city, which made the siege last longer than what it was. And so the Roman general named Scipio Aemilianus, who was kind of related to Scipio Africanus, I think honestly his grandson, he's the one that sacked the city in 146. So if you know about Carthage, it was eventually destroyed by the Romans. They laid waste to it. They say like 90% of the Carthaginian population was wiped out in the sack of Carthage. I think they may have had like 500,000 people that were there, and 50,000 remained afterwards, who were mostly enslaved following it. So not much left, of course, of the ruins of Carthage. It's pretty much, like I said, it's like a UNESCO site now, protected by the UN. And so you can see all these different ruins they have in where Tunis is now. Like here's another one, of course, showing all the different, I guess, houses or buildings that were there that were all burned out by the Romans. And there is a legend. I don't know if you've heard about this story. There's a legend that persisted that the Romans, after they sacked Carthage, they took salt and they salted the whole area so nothing would grow there. afterwards, and they're not sure if it's true. They think it might be a legend that was kind of made up about Carthage, because they do know that afterwards the Romans rebuilt a kind of a Roman version of Carthage that they have. But you're looking at the actual ruins of Carthage, which are left over from when it was sacked back in the 2nd century BC. Here's an aerial view, too, to kind of give you an idea. They think it was like many square miles, like Carthage, a huge city that's there. And so not much left of it. It's mostly ruins with a lot of sand that's there, I guess, covering up some parts of it. Looks like salt, I guess. But that's all pretty much that's left of, what Carthage was a long time ago. What's going to happen afterwards, I'll get to later. The Romans, after they, defeat the Carthage, absorb whatever, I guess, culture from them that they have, and then they take all their territories and kind of bring that into the Roman Republic, and that becomes basically part of vast provinces of the Roman Empire, because, between the 2nd, 1st centuries BC, the Romans are going to start to pretty much conquer all of the Mediterranean Sea. And the Romans will joke later that they call it RC, is what they dubbed it. Mare Nostrum, I think, was the Latin they called it. But Carthage was kind of absorbed into that, like I'm saying. So that's basically what happened to the Carthaginians in their culture, the Phoenicians, what's pretty much left from ancient times. So, like I said, their legacy is more language, like the whole Phoenician alphabet, that influenced other alphabets. That's something that they're kind of known for. Before I go, don't forget, you need to work on that first exam on ancient Egypt. So that's something y'all should be concentrating on right now to wrap that up. And of course, I told you that vocab is also due Friday as well. So y'all should be working on that to get those 2 main assignments out the way, because I will include, like, I think I want to say Wednesday, I'll have another Canvas quiz coming up, which will be on the Phoenicians and also the Israelites, because Wednesday I'll kind of go into and discuss the history of, like, the Israelites and early Jewish history. I think I'm going to go at least up to, like, maybe early Roman times, like what happened to the Jews and all that. And that's mostly what I'll kind of cover, at least for that part of Israelite Jewish history as well. So that's it for today. Kind of a shorter lecture, of course. Probably the one on the Israelites will be a little longer, of course, on Wednesday. But that's it. I think I had one student that came in late. Hey, Kayla, what's going on this morning? But that's it. If you have any comments, questions about the class, don't forget, you can, of course, comments, of course, on YouTube or also in Canvas discussions. If you got a comment, or of course, a question about the class, do email me as well at my email address. And so that's it. Y'all take care and have a great, of course, week of classes at BRCC. So y'all take care.